Right, so we're heading for the end of chapter 5, and the next section, last section, is called A Load of Bull. It was partly the Norman reign in Sicily that led to the second and much greater problem of Leo's reign, what was known as the Great Schism between the Western and Eastern Church. For centuries, the two churches had been growing apart. There were differences in their rituals. Byzantines hated the filioque clause. The Western Church widely used it. Whereas the Western churches used unleavened bread in the Eucharist, the East didn't. In the East, the clergy could keep their wives. In the West, they were supposed to be celibate and unmarried. But there were also fundamental differences in language and culture. The Byzantines believed that doctrine was best agreed by ecumenical councils. For them, the Pope was, at best, first among equals. To the Latins, the Greeks' endless discussions over words and their meaning was infuriating and intolerable. They wanted decisions, not yet another debate. The Patriarch of Constantinople at the time was Michael Cerularius, a man who proved that popes weren't the only church leaders who could be petty, narrow-minded bigots. Cerularius hated Rome and was determined that Rome should be brought down a peg or several. It was usual, on assuming the job of Patriarch, for the new man to write to Rome and assure the Pope of his orthodoxy. Michael didn't bother. His motto was, "I will not serve," though how he squared that with Jesus' commands to Christians to serve one another, he never said. He saw Leo's ill-fated military adventure in the south as an attempt to weaken the power of the Byzantine Empire. When he learned that, horror of horrors, the Normans were forcing the Greek churches on the island to use unleavened bread for the Eucharist, he retaliated by insisting that all the Latin churches in Constantinople use leavened bread. If they objected, he closed down the church. Leo looked on in horror. There was an exchange of letters. The Patriarch called the Latin customs sinful and Judaistic. The Pope countered that he wasn't the proper Patriarch, so there. To back up his claim for supremacy in the West, Leo quoted from a document found in the papal archives, which proved that Constantinople was subject to Rome. It was an ancient document, signed by Constantine the Great himself, and dated from 313. Apparently, Pope Sylvester I had healed the emperor from leprosy, in gratitude for which the emperor had given the Pope and his successors Rome and all the provinces, districts and cities of Italy and the West, as subject to the Roman Church forever. And, lest anyone accuse this letter of being a forgery, the document itself says that they should be burnt in the nethermost hell. The document, known because of the amazing generosity of the emperor as the donation of Constantine, had been mislaid for, about 300 years or so, before being rediscovered in the 8th century. Leo quoted great chunks of it in a letter to Michael Cerularius. Clearly he believed it to be genuine, but it is one of the most successful frauds in history, right up there with Bigfoot, Piltdown Man, and the idea that sprouts are food. No one knows who made it up. It was probably written in the mid-8th century when the popes were negotiating with the Franks. Popes carried on using it to support their claims of supremacy for the next 200 years. Eventually it was exposed as a forgery by a scholar called Lorenzo Valla, who showed that the language it used couldn't possibly have been written in 313. Finally, in 1054, Leo sent 3 envoys to Constantinople to negotiate a truce. It was probably not a good thing that all 3 really hated the Greeks. Their names were Cardinal Humbert of Mourmoutier, Cardinal Frederick of Lorraine, and Archbishop Peter of Amalfi. They acted like boors. The emperor was polite to them, but the Patriarch refused to recognize their authority. And then the 3 men heard the news that back in Italy, Leo had died. At this point, sensible envoys would have returned, or at the very least simply waited for another instruction. But not Humbert and co. Instead, they just carried on arguing. A monk from the monastery of the Studium, who had dared to politely disagree with the Pope's claims, was called a pestiferous pimp and a disciple of the malignant Mahomet. Finally, in the face of such flagrant politeness, Humbert lost it. At 3 p.m, Saturday the 16th of July, 1054, these non-papal representatives, dressed in all their finery, strode into the great church of Hagia Sophia and laid a bull of excommunication on the high altar. A papal bull is not a large religious animal. You're probably thinking of a sacred cow. It is a document, an official letter or pronouncement, and the name comes from the lead seal, Latin bulla, that was added to the letter to authenticate it. Anyway, this one excommunicated Patriarch Michael and all his followers. It also rather bafflingly excommunicated the devil for good measure, which rather assumes that up to then the devil had been a good Orthodox churchgoer. That done, they turned on their heels and marched from the building, pausing only to shake the dust symbolically from their feet. 2 days later, they left for Rome. Mostly, people took no notice. In Constantinople, the bull was burned, barbecue perhaps, and everyone went to watch the races or eat feta or do something else Eastern and Greek. After all, only a handful of people, and Satan, had been excommunicated. Anyway, the document was technically illegal, since there was no pope to issue it. You can't have a papal bull if there is no pope. Not only that, but it was full of obvious mistakes. But there was too much history. The bull was not rescinded in Rome for another 911 years, in 1965. After all their trial separations, this was it. Divorce.